Senator cuts mic of teen climate activist livestream explodes to 12 million views in an hour. The silence was the loudest thing Ilara Vance had ever heard. It wasn't a gentle silence, like the hush of snowfall over the pines back in Havenwood. It was a violent, manufactured void. 1 second, her voice, trembling but gaining strength, was filling the cavernous Senate hearing room, bouncing off the marble effigies of long-dead statesmen. The next, there was nothing. A dead hum from the microphone. A digital amputation. The small red light on the mic stand blinked once, then died. "Your time is up, Miss Vance." The voice belonged to Senator Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. It was a voice polished by decades in power, smooth and dense as the mahogany dais from which he presided. It was a voice that didn't get its hands dirty. It simply signed the orders that did. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on a stack of papers, his silver fountain pen already poised for the next item on the agenda. It was the dismissal that stung more than the interruption. She wasn't an adversary to be defeated. She was a procedural box to be checked. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a humiliating crimson tide. 100 pairs of eyes were on her. The board looked. Senators on either side of Thorne, their faces a gallery of practiced indifference. The aides lining the walls, their expressions carefully neutral, betraying nothing. The press corps, a restless pack of predators who had smelled the first drop of blood in a long, dry afternoon. And behind them, the spectators in the gallery, their faces a blur of curiosity and pity. But worst of all were the cameras. 3 of them, cold and black and unblinking. C-SPAN's unmerciful, high-definition gaze. She knew that one of those cameras was feeding a live stream, a little link she'd shared on her shoestring social media channels just hours before with a hopeful, naive caption, "They have to listen this time." She had been in the middle of a sentence she had practiced in the mirror of her cheap DC motel room 1,000 times. A sentence forged in the memory of mud and loss, double quotes, ... And when the water came for the 3rd time in 5 years, "It didn't just take the soil from my grandfather's farm," she'd been saying, her voice cracking just so. "It took our future. It took the idea that a promise made to the land is a promise kept. The floodwaters of a warming planet don't care about subcommittees or fiscal reports. They just take." That's when he'd cut it. The silence rushed in, and now it was all that was left. Her words, her grandfather's farm, her town's future, all of it, hanging unfinished in the refrigerated air. Deleted with the casual flick of a powerful man's thumb. "Thank you for your testimony," Senator Thorne continued, the faintest emphasis on testimony, making it sound like a childish tantrum. "While your passion is noted. This committee deals in economic realities, not youthful idealism. We have a responsibility to our nation's energy sector and the hard-working Americans it employs." He finally lifted his eyes to meet hers. They were pale blue, the color of a winter sky, and just as cold. There was a ghost of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a smile of ownership. He owned this room. He owned the agenda. He owned the silence. For that one searing moment, he owned her. She felt a tremor start in her hands. The pages of her prepared speech, clutched in her white-knuckled grip, began to flutter. She could see the headline already. "Hysterical teen activist has meltdown before Senate committee." She had to get out. Without a word, she turned, her worn-out thrift store blazer feeling like a suit of armor that had just been pierced. She walked away from the witness table, down the plush crimson runner, each step an eternity. The silence followed her, a physical weight on her shoulders. She didn't dare look back. She could feel the cameras tracking her, zooming in on her shame. The heavy oak doors at the back of the chamber seemed a mile away. As her hand closed over the cold brass handle, she heard Senator Thorne's voice one last time, already moving on. His tone utterly unchanged. "Next on the docket, we have Mr. Harrison Cole, CEO of Ethelred Energy, to discuss the strategic importance of the new offshore drilling permits." The door clicked shut behind her, but the silence, his silence, followed her out into the hall. The hallway was a mausoleum of polished marble and echoing quiet. Portraits of past senators, jowly and severe, judged her from their gilded frames. The air smelled of floor wax and old paper. A sterile scent that felt a world away from the rich, earthy smell of the Havenwood soil she had come here to defend. Elara stumbled into the nearest women's restroom, the door sighing shut behind her. The bright, unforgiving fluorescent lights bounced off the pristine white tiles. She leaned against the cool marble of the sink, her reflection a stranger pale, wild-eyed girl with flushed cheeks and a blazer that was too big for her. This was it, her one shot. She had crowdfunded the bus ticket from her dying town. She had spent weeks researching, writing, rehearsing. She had poured every ounce of her grief and fury into those 5 allotted minutes of testimony. And he had erased it all with a button. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Then another. Soon, a silent, racking sob shook her frame. It was the sob of absolute defeat. He had won. Men like him always won. They had the money, the power, the mahogany desks, and the microphone switches. What did she have? A story about mud, a handful of statistics that they'd already paid their own experts to refute. She slid down the cold wall, her knees giving way, until she was huddled on the floor, the immaculately clean tiles cold against her skin. She was 17 years old, and she had never felt so small, so utterly powerless. She thought of her grandfather, sitting in his small rented apartment, watching the livestream, his heart full of a fragile, desperate hope. She had let him down. She had let them all down. Her hand, searching for something, anything to hold on to, slipped into the pocket of her jeans. Her fingers closed around a piece of cold, gritty metal. She pulled it out. It was a key. An old, brass skeleton key, caked in a film of dried, grayish mud. The key to the front door of her grandfather's farmhouse. The house was gone, splintered into nothing by the last flood, the foundation cracked beyond repair. But her grandfather, in a moment of heartbreaking optimism, had waded through the receding water and plucked this one key from the debris. House is just wood and nails, he'd told her, pressing it into her palm. A home is a memory. Don't you let them take that, too. Staring at the key, something inside Ilara shifted. The shame began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of anger. Thorn hadn't just silenced her. He had dismissed the memory of her home. He had called her grandfather's loss youthful idealism. He had weighed the lives of her neighbors against offshore drilling permits and found them wanting. The ember glowed brighter. It wasn't a wildfire of rage. Not yet. It was something deeper, quieter, a resolve that settled in her bones. He could take her microphone, but he couldn't take her story. He could own the room, but he couldn't own the truth. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs still shaky. She looked at her reflection again. The tears had stopped. Her eyes, though red, now held a different light, a glint of steel. She didn't know what would happen next. She had no plan, no platform, no voice. But as she clutched the muddy key in her hand, she made a silent vow. This was not the end. This was the beginning. She had no idea how right she was. Well, Ilara was having her breakdown and rebirth on the cold tiles of a Senate bathroom. The internet was catching fire. A live stream, even on C-SPAN's niche platform, is a strange beast. For the first 20 minutes of her testimony, the viewer count had hovered around a paltry 3,000, mostly her supporters from Havenwood, a few climate nerd bloggers, and probably some of Senator Thorne's aides monitoring for gaffes. The moment Thorne's thumb descended on that button, everything changed. The silence, so devastating to Ilara in the room, was an explosion online. It was an act of such blatant, condescending censorship that it transcended politics. You didn't need to know the first thing about carbon tax or drilling permits to understand what had just happened. You saw a powerful, smug man in a suit silencing a passionate young woman who was fighting for her home. It was a primal story. David and Goliath for the digital age. The viewer count, visible in the corner of the screen, began to jump. 3,104, 5,788, 12,930. A tech reporter for a major news outlet, bored and scrolling through feeds, caught it. He clipped a 30-second exchange-hilarious, impassioned plea. Thorne's dead-eyed stare. The cut. The condescending dismissal. He posted it to Twitter with a simple, devastating caption. Watch. Sen. Marcus Thorne, RWY, cuts the mic of 17-year-old climate activist Ilara Vance as she describes her hometown being destroyed by floods. Hashtag let her speak. The hashtag was the spark. The clip was the gasoline. Within 10 minutes, the viewer count on the C-SPAN stream passed 100,000. People weren't tuning in for the testimony of the Ethelred Energy CEO. They were tuning in to witness the scene of the crime. To leave furious comments in the chat that scrolled by in a furious, unreadable blur. He did not just do that. What a coward. Hashtag let her speak. This is what corruption looks like. I'm a Republican, and this is disgusting. Let the kid talk. Within 30 minutes, the clip was everywhere. On TikTok, creators were using the green screen effect to put themselves in the hearing room, their faces contorted in rage, pointing at a frozen image of Thorne's smirk. Duets appeared, with people lip-syncing Thorne's dismissal and then launching into their own tirades. On Instagram, infographics were popping up. Who is Lara Vance? Next to a grainy screenshot of her earnest face, contrasted with who is Senator Thorne, and a list of his top corporate donors, with Ethelred Energy circled in red dot. By the time Lara had washed her face and walked out of the Hart Senate office building into the hazy DC afternoon, the livestream had peaked at 12.4 million concurrent viewers. The clip itself had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. Hashtag Let Her Speak was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Her phone, a cheap 3-year-old model with a cracked screen, had been on silent in her pocket. When she pulled it out, it was so hot from the constant notifications that it felt like it might melt. Hundreds of texts, thousands of mentions, dozens of friend requests from people she'd never met. It was a digital avalanche. She sat on a park bench across the street, numbly scrolling. A famous actress, known for her environmental work, had tweeted, "The arrogance of men like Senator Thorne is why our planet is burning. Lara Vance is a hero. We stand with you. Hashtag Let Her Speak." That tweet alone had 200,000 likes. A popular political commentator, a firebrand with a nightly cable show, posted, "Forget policy. This is about decency." Senator Thorne showed he has none. "My producers are trying to find Lara Vance. We want to give her the hour he stole from her." Even brands, smelling a safe, viral moment, were jumping in. A sustainable clothing company tweeted, "Courage looks good on you, Lara. We'd like to offer you a new, ethically sourced blazer." Hashtag Let Her Speak. It was dizzying, surreal. Just an hour ago, she had been a nobody, a ghost in a hallway. Now, her name was in the mouths of millions. Her face was a symbol. But a symbol of what? Of being shut down. Of being humiliated. A news alert popped up on her screen from a major paper. Let Her Speak erupts online after Senator silences teen activist in fiery exchange. They were already calling it a fiery exchange, as if she had done anything other than simply exist while being publicly extinguished. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. She finally answered, her voice a little hoarse. "Hello, is this Lara Vance?" A fast-talking, energetic voice asked. "This is Chloe from the Daily Breakdown. We're the biggest political podcast on the West Coast. Listen, what Thorne did to you was garbage. Absolute garbage. We want you on the show tomorrow. We can fly you out to LA first class. We want to hear the rest of that speech." Before Lara could even process the offer, another call came through. She clicked over. "Miss Vance, my name is Arthur Finch. I'm the senior producer for the Covington Hour. We'd like you to be our lead guest tonight. Live. We can send a car for you in 20 minutes. It was happening too fast. The world was screaming her name, but all she could hear was the echo of that dead microphone. They didn't want her. They wanted the girl who got shut down. They wanted the controversy, the clicks, the ratings. She hung up the phone and silenced it completely, shoving it deep into her bag. The viral wave was terrifying. It felt just like the floods back home, powerful, indiscriminate, and utterly impossible to control. It could lift you up, but it could also just as easily drag you under and tear you apart. She sat on the bench, the monumental Capitol dome looming behind her, a symbol of the power she had tried to appeal to. But the real power, she was beginning to realize, was no longer contained in those marble halls. It was in the phones and screens of millions of ordinary people, a decentralized, chaotic, and terrifying force. And it had just chosen her as its avatar. She wasn't sure if it was a rescue or a different kind of drowning. The first crack in Senator Thorne's world appeared, not with a bang, but with a frantic, hushed phone call. "Marcus, we have a problem." It was his chief of staff, a perpetually stressed man named Gene, who had the pallor of someone who subsisted on coffee and Thorne was in his private office, a lavishly appointed room with leather-bound books he'd never read and a sweeping view of the National Mall. He was swirling a glass of amber liquid, the good stuff he saved for after a particularly satisfying session of legislative dominance. "What is it, Gene?" Thorne asked, his voice still smooth with victory. "Did the Ethelred wire come through?" "Forget the wire." Gene's voice was an octave higher than usual. "Have you been online?" Have you seen Twitter? We're not just getting racial, Marcus, we're being obliterated. Hashtag let her speak is trending globally. Globally. Thorne scoffed, taking a slow sip of his scotch. It's a flash in the pan. A bunch of hysterical children on their little apps. It'll be over by morning. The Washington Post just ran a front-page story on their website. The New York Times is working on one. I've gotten calls from CNN, Fox News, and the BBC. They're not asking about the drilling permits. They're asking why you silenced a teenage girl. The ice in Thorne's glass clinked as his hand tightened. I didn't silence her. I enforced the committee's rules of order. Her time was up. It was a matter of procedure. It didn't look like procedure, Marcus. It looked like a bully punching down. The clip is everywhere. They're splicing it with your campaign ads about listening to the forgotten voices of America. It's a bloodbath. Thorne walked over to his desk and tapped his computer awake. Jean was right. It was a tidal wave of fury. He saw the TikToks, the celebrity tweets, the memes casting him as a cartoon villain. His carefully cultivated image of a stern but fair statesman was being torched in real time. Put out a statement. Thorne snapped, his composure finally cracking. Something about how I respect the passion of young people, but that the Senate has a duty to maintain decorum. Blame the radical left for manufacturing outrage. We're already working on it, Jean said. But it's like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. And there's something else. Ethelred is getting cold feet. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office. Air conditioning? What are you talking about? Harrison Cole just testified. We have a deal. Their PR department is in full-blown panic mode. They're being flooded with boycott threats. They're worried about brand damage by association. Harrison's assistant called me 10 minutes ago. He said, and I quote, "We are reevaluating our position in light of the unexpected public response." That was it. That was the real threat. The moral outrage of the masses was an annoyance. The wavering loyalty of his patrons was a dagger to the heart. The money from Ethelred wasn't just campaign funding. It was more important than that. It was everything. Get Harrison on the phone for me. Now, Thorne commanded, his voice low and dangerous. But Harrison Cole was suddenly unavailable. Meanwhile, Ilara sat in a small nondescript diner several blocks from the capital, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. She had found the place by instinct, drawn to its anonymity. The air smelled of grease and burnt coffee, a comforting, honest smell. Her phone was off. She didn't want the producers, the agents, or the well-meaning brands. A local reporter, a young woman not much older than herself, with kind eyes and a notepad instead of a camera crew, had found her through a mutual acquaintance from an environmental NGO. Her name was Maya. "They're offering you the world right now," Maya said, taking a sip of her own coffee. "Why aren't you taking it?" Ilara looked down at her hands, wrapped around the warm mug. "Because it's not my world," she said softly. "It's theirs. The TV shows, the Twitter fights. It's all part of the same game he plays. Just a different arena. I go on their shows. I get angry. He calls me a radical. And everyone goes back to their corners. Nothing changes. The water still rises." Maya nodded slowly, writing in her notepad. "So what do you do?" Ilara reached into her pocket and placed the mud-caked key on the table between them. It looked alien on the clean formica. "I tell my story," Ilara said, "not the 30-second clip. The whole story. About Heavenwood. About my grandfather. About what it feels like to watch your home wash away while men in expensive suits talk about economic realities." She spoke for an hour. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform for a camera. She just talked. Maya listened, her pen flying across the page. It was the testimony she had never been allowed to give, delivered not in a marble coliseum, but in a sticky vinyl booth. The story Maya published that evening was different from the hot takes and furious punditry. It was quiet, deep, and devastating. It was titled, "The Key and the Flood." The story, a senator, didn't want you to hear. It wasn't about the drama of the mic cut. It was about the tragedy that had led to it. It was filled with quotes from Ilara about her town, her family, and her quiet, unshakable belief that things could be better. The article included a single, powerful photo Maya had taken with her phone, the muddy brass key resting in Ilara's palm. That article, and that photo, did more damage to Senator Thorne than all the memes in the world. The viral rage had given Ilara a platform, but her quiet dignity was what gave her a voice. The power flip wasn't loud. It was a slow, seismic shift. Thorne was losing control of the narrative. Not to a screaming mob, but to a steady, clear story of truth. He was discovering that while he could cut a microphone, he couldn't cut a memory. And Ilara's memory, now shared with millions, was becoming a part of the permanent record. The blow that would shatter Senator Thorne's world came not from the public, but from within his own house. His son Julian was home from Georgetown University for the week. At 21, Julian was everything a political dynasty could want on the surface. Sharp, handsome, with his father's jawline but his mother's kinder eyes. He was also, in secret, profoundly ashamed of his father's work. He'd grown up in the shadow of the Capitol, but his heart was with the protesters outside the gates. He had watched the livestream from his laptop in the family's stately Georgetown home. He'd seen the clip. He'd read the articles. He'd seen the photo of the muddy key and felt a twisting in his gut. That evening, the house was thick with attention that had nothing to do with politics. His mother, Eleonora, was having a bad day. She was in her room, the curtains drawn, the only sound, the gentle hiss of her oxygen machine. Her illness was a slow, cruel thief, a rare neurological disorder that was stealing her piece by piece. The experimental treatments, the ones that gave her fleeting moments of clarity and comfort, were not covered by any insurance. Their cost was astronomical, a mountain of bills that grew higher each month. Thorne came home late, his face a grim mask of fury and stress. He barely acknowledged Julian, heading straight for the study and the decanter of scotch. Julian followed him. "You should apologize to her," Julian said, his voice quiet but firm. Thorne whirled around, his eyes blazing. "Apologize? For what?" "For doing my job. For upholding the integrity of the United States Senate against a theatrical, unprepared child." "She wasn't unprepared, Dad. She was authentic." "You were cruel," Julian shot back, his own anger rising. "You didn't just disagree with her. You humiliated her. And for what? So your friends at Eth can get their drilling permits, so they can keep poisoning the planet. You have no idea what you're talking about." Thorne roared, slamming his glass down on the desk. "You live in this house. You go to that university, all paid for by a system you claim to despise. You want to talk about poison. The world is poison. It's a fight for survival, and I am doing what I must to protect this family. By selling your soul." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. Thorne's face went white. He stared at his son, his chest heaving. For a moment, Julian saw not a powerful senator, but a tired, desperate man cornered by a choice he'd made long ago. The fight went out of Thorne. He sank into his leather chair, his head in his hands. "You don't understand," he whispered, the words ragged. "The treatments for your mother, the cost, a senator's salary doesn't cover it. Not even close." Julian stood frozen. He knew his mother's care was expensive, but he had never known the details. He had assumed his family's old money, their investments, were enough. "What are you talking about?" Julian asked, a cold dread creeping into his voice. Thorne didn't answer. His gaze flickered towards a locked drawer in his antique desk. A drawer Julian had always been forbidden to open. In that flicker, Julian understood. The donations, the consulting fees, the off-the-books support from companies like Energy. It wasn't just about political power. It was about survival. It was blood money, laundered through shell corporations, and funneled into the one thing that mattered more to Marcus Thorne than his career, his wife, the fight, the viral storm, the public humiliation. It all suddenly clicked into a terrible new focus. His father's frantic, vicious defense of his corporate patrons wasn't just about greed or ideology. It was the desperate scrambling of a man terrified of having his wife's lifeline cut off. Julian felt a wave of nausea. He backed out of the study, leaving his father alone with his scotch and his secrets. He went to his own room, his mind racing. He thought of Ilara Vance and her muddy key. He thought of his mother, wasting away in the next room. Two worlds of pain, colliding in his father's choices. He sat down at his laptop. His hands trembled as he typed an email to Maya, the journalist who had written the article about the key. He used an encrypted, anonymous email service. "I think I can help you understand why Senator Thorne is so loyal to Ethelred Energy," he wrote. "It's not what you think. Look into a foundation called the Eleonora Wellness Initiative. Follow the money." He hit send, his heart pounding. He didn't know if it was an act of betrayal or an act of justice. Maybe it was both. He had just handed a stranger the weapon that could destroy his own father, all to clear a conscience he wasn't sure he deserved to have. Maya received the email at 1:17 a.m. She was a journalist, which meant she was a professional insomniac, and a connoisseur of cryptic tips. Most were duds, but this one, with its specific, verifiable name, the Eleonora Wellness Initiative, felt different. She spent the next 48 hours in a rabbit hole of digital paperwork, corporate filings, tax records, donor lists. The Eleonora Wellness Initiative presented itself as a small, private foundation dedicated to funding research into rare neurological diseases. Its public filings were clean, if opaque, but the anonymous tip gave her the thread she needed to pull. She cross-referenced the foundation's major donors, a series of numbered LLCs, with no public-facing operations, with a leaked list of Energy's Political Action Committee expenditures. It was a perfect, elegant, and utterly damning match. Ethelred wasn't just donating to Thorne's campaign. They were funneling millions, tax-free, into a private foundation that had only one purpose: paying the exorbitant medical bills for Eleonora Thorne, the senator's dying wife. It was all there. The transfers from Ethelred's shell companies, the subsequent payments from the foundation to a specialized clinic in Switzerland. It was a sophisticated, heartbreaking, and deeply illegal scheme to disguise corporate bribes as charitable giving. Senator Thorne hadn't just silenced Ilara Vance to protect a drilling permit. He'd done it to protect his wife's life. The story was a bombshell. It would not only end Thorne's career, it would likely send him to prison. It reframed everything. He wasn't a one-dimensional villain. He was a tragic figure. A man who had made a deal with the devil for the most human of reasons: love and desperation. Maya felt the exhilarating, terrifying thrill that every journalist dreams of. This was the story that would make her career. But there was a problem. Her source was Julian Thorne, the senator's son. And her subject was not just a corrupt politician, but a grieving family and a dying woman. To run the story would be to drag Eleonora Thorne's private suffering into the harsh glare of the public spotlight. It would turn her final months into a media circus. This was where the rules of journalism blurred with the laws of human decency. She knew she couldn't make the decision alone. She needed to talk to the one person who had as much at stake in this as anyone. She needed to talk to Ilara. Maya arranged to meet her at the same diner. She laid out the printouts on the Formica table: the bank transfers, the foundation records. She explained the entire scheme, her voice low. Ilara stared at the documents, her face pale. She saw the name Eleanor Thorne on a hospital invoice for a sum of money so large it seemed fictional. She thought of the senator's cold, cruel face, and tried to reconcile it with the image of a husband sitting by his wife's bedside, terrified of the bills piling up. Her fight had been so simple, so pure. It was about the planet. It was about justice. It was David versus Goliath. But this was a tangled knot of pain and impossible choices. Thorne's actions were inexcusable, corrupt, and criminal. But his motives were something she understood. He was fighting for his home, in his own twisted way. Just like she was. "If you publish this," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper, "it will destroy him completely." "Yes," Maya agreed. "And the drilling permits will be dead on arrival. The entire project will be scrapped under the weight of the scandal. You'll win. Everything you came here for, you'll win." This was the moment. The wrong but tempting moment. Here was the ultimate weapon, handed to her on a silver platter. She could give Maya the green light, and by morning, Senator Thorne would be a pariah, his life in ruins. It would be karma. It would be justice. The world would be saved a few more offshore oil rigs. All she had to do was say yes. All she had to do was agree to weaponize a woman's illness, to use a family's private tragedy as a tool for public victory. What would her grandfather say? He was a man of simple morals. "You don't kick a man when he's down," he'd always say, "but you also don't let a wolf guard the henhouse." She looked at Maya, whose face was a mask of professional neutrality, but whose eyes held the weight of the question. She saw the path forward, a clean, bright line to victory, paved with the rubble of another person's life. It felt wrong. It felt like his kind of victory, not hers. Winning by any means necessary. Becoming the person you're fighting against. "What if there's another way?" Ilara said, pushing the papers back across the table. Maya raised an eyebrow. "What other way is there? You have him, it's checkmate." "Checkmate feels a lot like kicking a man when he's down," Ilara murmured, her gaze distant. She thought of the cold key in her pocket, and the man who had done this all for a woman named Eleonora. An idea began to form, a terrifying, audacious, and profoundly risky idea, an idea that had no precedent in the brutal calculus of politics. I need to see him, she said. Not as a witness, not as an activist, just as a person. I need to talk to Senator Thorne. The meeting was not set up through official channels. There were no schedulers, no press releases, no aides taking notes. Ilara, using the contact information Maya had for his son, Julian, sent a single, simple message. I know, please meet me. Lincoln Memorial, tomorrow, 6 a.m. She wasn't sure he would come. Why would he? But something told her he would. The dawn was breaking over Washington, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gray. The air was cool and still. At the top of the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the great, seated figure of Abraham Lincoln watched over the sleeping city. It was a place of quiet power, a place for contemplation. Ilara was there first. She wasn't wearing her ill-fitting blazer. She was in jeans and a simple gray hoodie. She looked like any other teenager in the world. At precisely 6 a.m., she saw him approaching from the direction of the reflecting pool. He was alone. He wore a simple dark coat, no tie. He looked older than he did under the harsh lights of the committee room. The lines on his face were deeper, etched by worry and lack of sleep. The smugness was gone, replaced by a profound, weary tension. He stopped a few feet away from her, his hands jammed in his pockets. The silence between them was different this time. It wasn't a weapon. It was a space filled with unspoken things. Your son is a good man, Ilara said, her voice soft but clear in the morning air. Thorne flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. It was all the confirmation she needed. He's worried. About you, she added. Thorne finally looked at her. His pale blue eyes filled not with contempt, but with a kind of exhausted curiosity. What do you want, Miss Vance? A public confession. My resignation on a platter. You have the story. Your reporter friend is probably sharpening her knives as we speak. Just get it over with. Ilara shook her head. That's not why I'm here. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie. For a heart-stopping second, Thorne tensed, a flicker of fear in his eyes. But she didn't pull out a phone or a recording device. She pulled out the muddy, brass key. She held it out to him on her open palm. This was the key to my grandfather's house, she said. The floods took it. He lost everything. This is why I came here, to fight for my home. Thorne stared at the key, then back at her face. He said nothing. Then, she reached into her other pocket. She pulled out a single, perfect, white rose. She had spent the last of her crowd-funded money on it that morning. Julian had mentioned in his emails to Maya that they were Eleanor's favorite. She held the rose out next to the key. And this, she said, her voice catching slightly, is for your home. This was the moment. The unforgettable, visual. The powerful, feared United States Senator, standing before the Lincoln Memorial at dawn, being confronted by the teenage girl he had humiliated. And she wasn't confronting him with threats or blackmail. She was confronting him with two simple, devastating objects, a symbol of his victim's loss, and a symbol of his own. Thorne looked from the muddy key to the pristine rose, his composure finally, completely shattering. His face crumpled. The iron mask of the senator dissolved, revealing the terrified, grieving husband beneath. A single, ragged breath escaped his lips, a sound of such profound pain that it made Ilara's own chest ache. He didn't take the objects. His hands remained in his pockets, clenched into fists. I know about the foundation, Ilara said gently. I know about the clinic in Switzerland. The reporter, Maya, she has it all. She's waiting for me to give her the word to publish it. Thorne squeezed his eyes shut. Then do it, he rasped. End it. Is that what Eleonora would want? Ilara asked. His eyes snapped open. The question hit him like a physical blow. Would she want her husband to go to prison? Ilara continued, pressing the moral dilemma, the choice that wasn't black and white. Would she want the last months of her life to be a public scandal? Or would she want him to do the right thing, not for his career, not for his party, but for his own soul? She took a step closer. She placed the muddy key gently on the marble bench beside them. Then she laid the white rose next to it. You have a choice, Senator, she said, her voice imbued with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Maya will not publish that story. I won't let her. On one condition. You recuse yourself from the vote on the drilling permits. You step down as chairman of the committee. And you devote what time you have left with her, not to Ethelred Energy. She was offering him a deal. Not a political one, but a human one. A path to a different kind of redemption. It was an act of radical, unearned mercy. Thorne stared at the key and the rose. Then back at Ilara. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the memorial. He saw the truth of her offer. It wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline. A chance to salvage something more important than his power. A chance to honor his wife in a way that all the money in the world could not. He slowly, deliberately, reached out and picked up the white rose. His fingers trembled as he held it. He didn't pick up the key. That wasn't his to hold. "Thank you," he whispered. The words were small, inadequate, but they held the weight of a world. He turned and walked away, down the steps of the memorial, leaving Ilara alone with Abraham Lincoln and the muddy key to a house that no longer existed. The news broke 2 days later, not in a scandalous expose, but in a dry, official press release. Senator Marcus Thorne was stepping down as chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal family health reasons. He would not be present for the vote on the coastal drilling initiative. Without his ruthless whipping of the vote and the full weight of his chairmanship, the initiative faltered. A few key moderate senators, spooked by the viral outrage and no longer under Thorne's thumb, flipped their votes. The bill failed by a margin of 2 dots. There was no victory parade for Ilara. She gave no triumphant interviews. When the news broke, she was already on a bus, heading home to Havenwood. She watched the headlines scroll by on her phone, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. She hadn't destroyed her enemy. She had simply given him the space to find his own conscience. Months later, an obituary for Eleanora Thorne appeared in the papers. It mentioned her love of white roses and her quiet dignity. It requested that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to a public fund for neurological research. Senator Thorne never returned to politics. Ilara continued her work, but not from the national stage. She worked locally, organizing community solar projects, helping farmers implement sustainable agriculture, and teaching kids about the land they lived on. Her fame from that one week in Washington gave her a platform, but she used it to amplify the voices of others, not just her own. The world didn't change overnight. The planet was still warming. The floods would likely come again, but something had shifted. A precedent had been set. A story had been told that resonated deeper than the usual political theater. Justice isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about building a world where you don't have to. Cruelty always collects, but mercy, sometimes, pays the highest dividend of all. Where are you reading this from? Drop your city, your state, your country. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next justice twist.